moved up to the second row with my tank so I didn't have a long walk back. Dad handed me a tissue as I sat down. I blew my nose, threaded the tubes around my ears, and put the nubbins back in. I thought we'd go into the proper sanctuary for the real funeral, but it all happened in that little side room. The literal hand of Jesus, I guess. The part of the cross he'd been nailed to. A minister walked up and stood behind the coffin, almost like the coffin was a pulpit or something, and talked a little bit about how Augustus had a courageous battle and how his heroism in the face of illness was an inspiration to us all. And I was already starting to get pissed off at the minister when he said, "In heaven, Augustus will finally be healed and whole," implying that he had been less whole than other people due to his leglessness, and I kind of could not repress my sigh of disgust. My dad grabbed me just above the knee and cut me a disapproving look, but from the row behind me, someone muttered almost inaudibly near my ear, "What a load of horse crap, eh, kid?" I spun around. Peter Van Houten wore a white linen suit, tailored to account for his rotundity, a powder blue dress shirt, and a green tie. He looked like he was dressed for a colonial occupation of Panama, not a funeral. The minister said, "Let us pray." But as everyone else bowed their head, I could only stare slack-jawed at the sight of Peter Van Houten. After a moment, he whispered, "We gotta fake pray," and bowed his head. I tried to forget about him and just pray for Augustus. I made a point of listening to the minister and not looking back. The minister called up Isaac, who was much more serious than he'd been at the pre-funeral. "Augustus Waters was the mayor of the secret city of Pennsylvania, and he is not replaceable," Isaac began. "Other people will be able to tell you funny stories about Gus because he was a funny guy, but let me tell you a serious one. A day after I got my eye cut out, Gus showed up at the hospital. I was blind and heartbroken and didn't want to do anything, and Gus burst into my room and shouted, 'I have wonderful news!' And I was like, 'I don't really want to hear wonderful news right now.' And Gus said, 'This is wonderful news you want to hear.' And I asked him, 'Fine, what is it?' And he said, 'You are going to live a good and long life filled with great and terrible moments that you cannot even imagine yet.'" Isaac couldn't go on. Or maybe that was all he had written. After a high school friend told some stories about Gus's considerable basketball talents and his many qualities as a teammate, the minister said, "We'll now hear a few words from Augustus's special friend, Hazel." Special friend? There were some titters in the audience, so I figured it was safe for me to start out by saying to the minister, "I was his girlfriend." That got a laugh. Then I began reading from the eulogy I'd written. There's a great quote in Gus's house, one that both he and I found very comforting. "Without pain, we couldn't know joy." I went on spouting bullshit encouragements as Gus's parents, arm in arm, hugged each other and nodded at every word. Funerals, I had decided, are for the living. After his sister Julie spoke, the service ended with a prayer about Gus's union with God, and I thought back to what he'd told me at Orange, that he didn't believe in mansions and harps, but did believe in capital S something, and so I tried to imagine him capital S somewhere as we prayed, but even then I could not quite convince myself that he and I would be together again. I already knew too many dead people. I knew that time would now pass for me differently than it would for him, that I, like everyone in that room, would go on accumulating loves and losses while he would not, and for me, that was the final and truly unbearable tragedy. Like all the innumerable dead, he'd once and for all been demoted from haunted to haunter. And then one of Gus's brothers-in-law brought up a boombox and they played this song Gus had picked out, a sad and quiet song by the Hectic Glow called The New Partner. I just wanted to go home, honestly. I didn't know hardly any of these people, and I felt Peter Van Houten's little eyes boring into my exposed shoulder blades. But after the song was over, everyone had to come up to me and tell me that I'd spoken beautifully and that it was a lovely service, which was a lie. It was a funeral. It looked like any other funeral. His pallbearers, cousins, his dad, an uncle, friends I'd never seen, came and got him, and they all started walking toward the hearse. When Mom and Dad and I got in the car, I said, "I don't want to go. I'm tired." "Hazel," Mom said. "Mom, there won't be a place to sit, and it'll last forever, and I'm exhausted." "Hazel, we have to go for Mr. and Mrs. Waters," Mom said. "Just," I said. I felt so little in the back seat for some reason. I kind of wanted to be little. I wanted to be like 6 years old or something. "Fine," I said. I just stared out the window a while. I really didn't want to go. I didn't want to see them lower him into the ground in the spot he'd picked out with his dad. And I didn't want to see his parents sink to their knees in the dew-wet grass and moan in pain. And I didn't want to see Peter Van Houten's alcoholic belly stretched against his linen jacket. And I didn't want to cry in front of a bunch of people. And I didn't want to toss a handful of dirt onto his grave. And I didn't want my parents to have to stand there beneath the clear blue sky with its certain slant of afternoon light, thinking about their day and their kid and my plot and my casket and my dirt. But I did these things. I did all of them and worse, because Mom and Dad felt we should. After it was over, Van Houten walked up to me and put a fat hand on my shoulder and said, "Could I hitch a ride? Left my rental at the bottom of the hill." I shrugged, and he opened the door to the back seat right as my dad unlocked the car. Inside, he leaned between the front seats and said, "Peter Van Houten, novelist emeritus and semi-professional disappointer." My parents introduced themselves. He shook their hands. I was pretty surprised that Peter Van Houten had flown halfway across the world to attend a funeral. "How did you even—" I started, but he cut me off. "I used the infernal internet of yours to follow the Indianapolis obituary notices." He reached into his linen suit and produced a fifth of whiskey. "And you just, bought a ticket and—" He interrupted again while unscrewing the cap. "It was $15,000 for a first-class ticket, but I'm sufficiently capitalized to indulge such whims. And the drinks are free on the flight. If you're ambitious, you can almost break even." Van Houten took a swig of the whiskey and then leaned forward to offer it to my dad, who said, "No thanks." Then Van Houten nodded the bottle toward me. I grabbed it. "Hazel," my mom said, but I unscrewed the cap and sipped. It made my stomach feel like my lungs. I handed the bottle back to Van Houten, who took a long slug from it and then said, "So, omnis cellula et cellula." "Huh?" "Your boy Waters and I corresponded a bit, and in his last—" "Wait, you read your fan mail now?" "No, he sent it to my house, not through my publisher, and I'd hardly call him a fan. He despised me. But at any rate, he was quite insistent that I'd be absolved for my misbehavior if I attended his funeral and told you what became of Anna's mother. So here I am, and there's your answer. Omnis cellula et cellula." "What?" I asked again. "Omnis cellula et cellula," he said again. "All cells come from cells. Every cell is born of a previous cell, which was born of a previous cell. Life comes from life. Life begets life, begets life, begets life, begets life." We reached the bottom of the hill. "Okay, yeah," I said. I was in no mood for this. Peter Van Houten would not hijack Gus's funeral. I wouldn't allow it. "Thanks," I said. "Well, I guess we're at the bottom of the hill." "You don't want an explanation?" he asked. "No," I said. "I'm good. I think you're a pathetic alcoholic who says fancy things to get attention like a really precocious 11-year-old, and I feel super bad for you. But yeah, no, you're not the guy who wrote An Imperial Affliction anymore, so you couldn't sequel it even if you wanted to. Thanks, though. Have an excellent life. But thanks for the booze, I said. Now get out of the car. He looked scolded. Dad had stopped the car and we just idled there below Gus's grave for a minute until Van Houten opened the door and, finally silent, left. As we drove away, I watched through the back window as he took a drink and raised the bottle in my direction, as if toasting me. His eyes looked so sad. I felt kinda bad for him, to be honest. We finally got home around 6, and I was exhausted. I just wanted to sleep. But Mom made me eat some cheesy pasta, although she at least allowed me to eat in bed. I slept with the BiPAP for a couple hours. Waking up was horrible. Because for a disoriented moment, I felt like everything was fine, and then it crushed me anew. Mom took me off the BiPAP. I tethered myself to a portable tank and stumbled into my bathroom to brush my teeth. Appraising myself in the mirror as I brushed my teeth, I kept thinking there were two kinds of adults. There were Peter Van Houten's, miserable creatures who scoured the earth in search of something to hurt. And then there were people like my parents, who walked around zombically, doing whatever they had to do to keep walking around. Neither of these futures struck me as particularly desirable. It seemed to me that I had already seen everything pure and good in the world, and I was beginning to suspect that even if death didn't get in the way, the kind of love that Augustus and I share could never last. So dawn goes down to day, the poet wrote. Nothing gold can stay. Someone knocked on the bathroom door. Occupada, I said. Hazel, my dad said. Can I come in? I didn't answer, but after a while I unlocked the door. I sat down on the closed toilet seat. Why did breathing have to be such work? Dad knelt down next to me. He grabbed my head and pulled it into his collarbone, and he said, I'm sorry, Gus died. I felt kind of suffocated by his t-shirt, but it felt good to be held so hard, pressed into the comfortable smell of my dad. It was almost like he was angry or something, and I liked that because I was angry too. It's total bullshit, he said. The whole thing. 80% survival rate and he's in the 20%? Bullshit. He was such a bright kid. It's bullshit. I hate it. But it was sure a privilege to love him, huh? I nodded into his shirt. Gives you an idea how I feel about you, he said. My old man. He always knew just what to say. Chapter 23. A couple days later, I got up around noon and drove over to Isaac's house. He answered the door himself. My mom took Graham to a movie, he said. We should go do something, I said. Can the something be play blind guy video games while sitting on the couch? Yeah, that's just the kind of something I had in mind. So we sat there for a couple hours talking to the screen together, navigating this invisible labyrinthine cave without a single lumen of light. The most entertaining part of the game by far was trying to get the computer to engage us in humorous conversation. Me. Touch the cave wall. Computer. You touched the cave wall. It is moist. Isaac. Lick the cave wall. Computer. I do not understand. Repeat. Me. Hump the moist cave wall. Computer. You attempt to jump. You hit your head. Isaac. Not jump. Hump. Computer. I don't understand. Isaac. Dude, I've been alone in the dark in this cave for weeks and I need some relief. Hump the cave wall. Computer. You attempt to jump. Me. Thrust pelvis against the cave wall. Computer. I do not. Isaac. Make sweet love to the cave. Computer. I do not. Me. Fine. Follow left branch. Computer. You follow the left branch. The passage narrows. Me. Crawl. Computer, you crawl for 100 yards. The passage narrows. Me. Snake crawl. Computer, you snake crawl for 30 yards. A trickle of water runs down your body. You reach a mound of small rocks blocking the passageway. Me. Can I hump the cave now? Computer, you cannot jump without standing. Isaac, I dislike living in a world without Augustus Waters. Computer, I don't understand. Isaac, me neither. Pause. He dropped the remote onto the couch between us and asked, "Do you know if it hurt or whatever?" He was really fighting for breath, I guess, I said. He eventually went unconscious, but it sounds like, yeah, it wasn't great or anything. Dying sucks. Yeah, Isaac said. And then after a long time, it just seems so impossible. Happens all the time, I said. You seem angry, he said. Yeah, I said. We just sat there quiet for a long time, which was fine. And I was thinking about way back in the very beginning in the literal heart of Jesus when Gus told us that he feared oblivion, and I told him that he was fearing something universal and inevitable, and how really the problem is not suffering itself or oblivion itself, but the depraved meaninglessness of these things, the absolutely inhuman nihilism of suffering. I thought of my dad telling me that the universe wants to be noticed, but what we want is to be noticed by the universe. To have the universe give a shit what happens to us, not the collective idea of sentient life, but each of us, as individuals. Gus really loved you, you know, he said. I know. He wouldn't shut up about it. I know, I said. It was annoying. I didn't find it that annoying, I said. Did he ever give you that thing he was writing? What thing? That sequel or whatever to that book you liked. I turned to Isaac. What? He said that he was working on something for you, but he wasn't that good of a writer. When did he say this? I don't know, like after he got back from Amsterdam at some point. At which point? I pressed. Had he not had a chance to finish it? Had he finished it and left it on his computer or something? Isaac sighed. I don't know. We talked about it over here once. He was over here like, we played with my email machine, and I'd just gotten an email from my grandmother. I can check on the machine if you... Yeah, where is it? He'd mentioned it a month before. A month. Not a good month, admittedly, but still, a month. That was enough time for him to have written something at least. There was still something of him, or by him at least, floating around out there. I needed it. I'm gonna go to his house, I told Isaac. I hurried out to the minivan and hauled the oxygen cart up and into the passenger seat. I started the car. A hip-hop beat blared from the stereo, and as I reached to change the radio station, someone started rapping. In Swedish. I swiveled around and screamed when I saw Peter Van Houten sitting in the back seat. I apologize for alarming you, Peter Van Houten said over the rapping. He was still wearing the funeral suit, almost a week later. He smelled like he was sweating alcohol. You're welcome to keep the CD, he said. It's Snook, one of the major Swedish... Get out of my car! I turned off the stereo. It's your mother's car, as I understand it, he said. Also, it wasn't locked. Oh my God! Get out of the car or I'll call 911. Dude, what is your problem? If only there were just one, he mused. I am here simply to apologize. You were correct in noting earlier that I am a pathetic little man, dependent upon alcohol. I had one acquaintance who only spent time with me because I paid her to do so. Worse still, she has since quit, leaving me the rare soul who cannot acquire companionship even through bribery. It is all true, Hazel. All that and more. Okay, I said. It would have been a more moving speech had he not slurred his words. You remind me of Anna. I remind a lot of people of a lot of people, I answered. I really have to go. So drive, he said. Get out! No. "You remind me of Anna," he said again. After a second, I put the car in reverse and backed out. I couldn't make him leave, and I didn't have to. I'd drive to Gus's house, and Gus's parents would make him leave. "You are, of course, familiar," Van Houten said, "with Antonietta Mayo." "Yeah, no," I said. I turned on the stereo, and the Swedish hip-hop blared, but Van Houten yelled over it. "She may soon be the youngest non-martyr saint ever beatified by the Catholic Church. She had the same cancer that Mr. Waters had, osteosarcoma. They removed her right leg. The pain was excruciating. As Antonietta Mayo lay dying at the ripened age of 6 from this agonizing cancer, she told her father, 'Pain is like fabric. The stronger it is, the more it's worth.' Is that true, Hazel?" I wasn't looking at him directly, but at his reflection in the mirror. "No!" I shouted over the music. "That's bullshit!" "But don't you wish it were true?" he cried back. I cut the music. "I'm sorry I ruined your trip. You were too young. You were—" He broke down, as if he had a right to cry over Gus. Van Houten was just another of the endless mourners who did not know him, another too-late lamentation on his wall. "You didn't ruin our trip, you self-important bastard. We had an awesome trip." "I am trying," he said. "I am trying, I swear." It was around then that I realized Peter Van Houten had a dead person in his family. I considered the honesty with which he had written about cancer kids. The fact that he couldn't speak to me in Amsterdam except to ask if I'd dressed like her on purpose. His shittiness around me and Augustus, his aching question about the relationship between pain's extremity and its value. He sat back there drinking, an old man who'd been drunk for years. I thought of a statistic I wish I didn't know. Half of marriages end in the year after a child's death. I looked back at Van Houten. I was driving down College, and I pulled over behind a line of parked cars and asked, "You had a kid who died?" "My daughter," he said. "She was 8. Suffered beautifully. Will never be beatified." "She had leukemia?" I asked. He nodded. "Like Anna," I said. "Very much like her, yes." "You were married?" "No, well, not at the time of her death. I was insufferable long before we lost her. Grief does not change you, Hazel. It reveals you." "Did you live with her?" "No, not primarily, although at the end we brought her to New York, where I was living, for a series of experimental tortures that increased the misery of her days without increasing the number of them." After a second I said, "So it's like you gave her this second life where she got to be a teenager." "I suppose that would be a fair assessment," he said, and then quickly added, "I assume you are familiar with Philippa Foot's trolley problem thought experiment." "And then I show up at your house, and I'm dressed like the girl you hoped she would live to become, and you're like, all taken aback by it." "There's a trolley running out of control down a track," he said. "I don't care about your stupid thought experiment," I said. "It's Philippa Foot's, actually." "Well, hers either," I said. "She didn't understand why it was happening," he said. "I had to tell her she would die. Her social worker said I had to tell her. I had to tell her she would die. So I told her she was going to heaven. She asked if I would be there, and I said that I would not yet. But eventually, she said, and I promised that yes, of course, very soon. And I told her that in the meantime, we had great family up there that would take care of her. And she asked me when I would be there, and I told her soon. 22 years ago. I'm sorry."
"So am I."
After a while, I asked, "What happened to her mom?" He smiled.
"You're still looking for your sequel, you little rat."
I smiled back. "You should go home," I told him. "Sober up. Write another novel. Do the thing you're good at. Not many people are lucky enough to be so good at something." He stared at me through the mirror for a long time.
"Okay," he said. "Yeah, you're right. You're right."
But even as he said it, he pulled out his mostly empty fifth of whiskey. He drank, recapped the bottle, and opened the door.
"Goodbye, Hazel."
"Take it easy, Van Houten." He sat down on the curb behind the car. As I watched him shrink in the rearview mirror, he pulled out the bottle, and for a second it looked like he would leave it on the curb. And then he took a swig. It was a hot afternoon in Indianapolis, the air thick and still like we were inside a cloud. It was the worst kind of air for me, and I told myself it was just the air when the walk from his driveway to his front door felt infinite. I rang the doorbell, and Gus's mom answered. "Oh, Hazel," she said, and kind of enveloped me, crying. She made me eat some eggplant lasagna. I guess a lot of people had brought them food or whatever, with her and Gus's dad. "How are you?" "I miss him." "Yeah." I didn't really know what to say. I just wanted to go downstairs and find whatever he'd written for me. Plus, the silence in the room really bothered me. I wanted them to be talking to each other, comforting or holding hands or whatever, but they just sat there eating very small amounts of lasagna, not even looking at each other.
"Heaven needed an angel,"
his dad said after a while. "I know," I said. Then his sisters and their mess of kids showed up and piled into the kitchen. I got up and hugged both his sisters and then watched the kids run around the kitchen with their sorely needed surplus of noise and movement, excited molecules bouncing against each other and shouting, "You're it! No, you're it! No, I was it, but then I tagged you! You didn't tag me, you missed me! Well, I'm tagging you now! No, dumb butt, it's a timeout! Daniel, do not call your brother a dumb butt! Mom, if I'm not allowed to use that word, how come you just used it, dumb butt, dumb butt?" And then chorally, "Dumb butt, dumb butt, dumb butt, dumb butt!" And at the table, Gus's parents were now holding hands, which made me feel better. "Isaac told me Gus was writing something? Something for me," I said. The kids were still singing their dumb butt song. "We can check his computer," his mom said. "He wasn't on it much the last few weeks," I said. "That's true. I'm not even sure we brought it upstairs. Is it still in the basement, Mark?"
"No idea."
"Well," I said, "can I?" I nodded toward the basement door.
"We're not ready,"
his dad said. "But of course, yes, Hazel, of course you can." I walked downstairs, past his unmade bed, past the gaming chairs beneath the TV. His computer was still on. I tapped the mouse to wake it up and then searched for his most recently edited files. Nothing in the last month. The most recent thing was a response paper to Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye. Maybe he'd written something by hand. I walked over to his bookshelves, looking for a journal or a notebook. Nothing. I flipped through his copy of An Imperial Affliction. He hadn't left a single mark in it. I walked to his bedside table next. Infinite Mayhem, the 9th sequel to The Price of Dawn, lay atop the table next to his reading lamp, the corner of page 138 turned down. He'd never made it to the end of the book. "Spoiler alert, Mayhem survives," I said out loud to him, just in case he could hear me. And then I crawled into his unmade bed, wrapping myself in his comforter like a cocoon, surrounding myself with his smell. I took out my cannula so I could smell better, breathing him in and breathing him out, the scent fading even as I lay there, my chest burning until I couldn't distinguish among the pains. I sat up in the bed after a while and reinserted my cannula and breathed for a while before going up the stairs. I just shook my head no in response to his parents' expectant looks. The kids raced past me. One of Gus's sisters, I could not tell them apart, said, "Mom, do you want me to take them to the park or something?" No, they're fine." Is there anywhere he might have put a notebook? Like by his hospital bed or something? The bed was already gone, reclaimed by hospice. "Hazel," his dad said, "you were there every day with us. He wasn't alone much, sweetie. He wouldn't have had time to write anything. I know I want that too. But the messages he leaves for us now are coming from above, Hazel." He pointed toward the ceiling as if Gus were hovering just above the house. Maybe he was, I don't know. I didn't feel his presence, though. "Yeah," I said. I promised to visit them again in a few days. I never quite caught his scent again. Chapter 24. 3 days later, on the 11th day AG, Gus's father called me in the morning. I was still hooked to the BiPAP, so I didn't answer, but I listened to his message the moment it beeped through to my phone. "Hazel, hi, it's Gus's dad. I found a, black moleskin notebook in the magazine rack that was near his hospital bed. I think near enough that he could have reached it. Unfortunately, there's no writing in the notebook. All the pages are blank. But the first, I think 3 or 4, the first few pages are torn out of the notebook. We looked through the house but couldn't find the pages, so I don't know what to make of that. But maybe those pages are what Isaac was referring to? Anyway, I hope that you are doing okay. You're in our prayers every day, Hazel. Okay, bye." 3 or 4 pages ripped from a moleskin notebook no longer in Augustus Waters' house. Where would he leave them for me? Taped to funky bones? No, he wasn't well enough to get there. The literal heart of Jesus. Maybe he'd left it there for me on his last good day. So I left 20 minutes early for support group the next day. I drove over to Isaac's house, picked him up, and then we drove down to the literal heart of Jesus with the windows of the minivan down, listening to the Hectic Glow's leaked new album, which Gus would never hear. We took the elevator. I walked Isaac to a seat in the circle of trust, then slowly worked my way around the literal heart. I checked everywhere. Under the chairs, around the lectern I'd stood behind while delivering my eulogy, under the treat table, on the bulletin board packed with Sunday school kids' drawings of God's love. Nothing. It was the only place we'd been together in those last days besides his house, and it either wasn't here or I was missing something. Perhaps he'd left it for me in the hospital, but if so, it had almost certainly been thrown away after his death. I was really out of breath by the time I settled into a chair next to Isaac, and I devoted the entirety of Patrick's nutless testimonial to telling my lungs they were okay, that they could breathe, that there was enough oxygen. They'd been drained only a week before Gus died. I watched the amber cancer water dribble out of me through the tube, and yet already they felt full again. I was so focused on telling myself to breathe that I didn't notice Patrick saying my name at first. I snapped to attention. "Yeah?" I asked. "How are you?" "I'm okay, Patrick. I'm a little out of breath." "Would you like to share a memory of Augustus with the group?" "I wish I would just die, Patrick. Do you ever wish you would just die?" "Yes," Patrick said, without his usual pause. "Yes, of course. So why don't you?" I thought about it. My old stock answer was that I wanted to stay alive for my parents because they would be all gutted and childless in the wake of me, and that was still true, kind of, but that wasn't it exactly. "I don't know." "In the hopes that you'll get better?" "No," I said. "No, it's not that. I really don't know." "Isaac?" I asked. I was tired of talking. Isaac started talking about true love. I couldn't tell them what I was thinking because it seemed cheesy to me, but I was thinking about the universe wanting to be noticed and how I had to notice it as best I could. I felt that I owed a debt to the universe that only my attention could repay, and also that I owed a debt to everybody who didn't get to be a person anymore, and everyone who hadn't gotten to be a person yet. What my dad had told me, basically. I stayed quiet for the rest of support group, and Patrick said a special prayer for me, and Gus's name was tacked on to the long list of the dead, 14 of them for every one of us. And we promised to live our best life today. And then I took Isaac to the car. When I got home, Mom and Dad were at the dining room table on their separate laptops, and the moment I walked in the door, Mom slammed her laptop shut. "What's on the computer?" "Just some antioxidant recipes. Ready for BiPAP and America's Next Top Model?" she asked. "I'm just going to lie down for a minute. Are you okay?" "Yeah, just tired." "Well, you've got to eat before you—" "Mom, I am aggressively unhungry." I took a step toward the door, but she cut me off. "Hazel, you have to eat. Just some No, I'm going to bed." "No," Mom said. "You're not." I glanced at my dad, who shrugged. "It's my life," I said. "You're not going to starve yourself to death just because Augustus died. You're going to eat dinner." I was really pissed off for some reason. "I can't eat, Mom. I can't, okay?" I tried to push past her, but she grabbed both my shoulders and said, "Hazel, you're eating dinner. You need to stay healthy." "No!" I shouted. "I'm not eating dinner, and I can't stay healthy because I'm not healthy. I am dying, Mom. I am going to die and leave you here alone, and you won't have a me to hover around, and you won't be a mother anymore, and I'm sorry, but I can't do anything about it, okay?" I regretted it as soon as I said it. "You heard me." "What? Did you hear me say that to your father?" Her eyes welled up. "Did you?" I nodded. "Oh, God, Hazel. I'm sorry. I was wrong, sweetie. That wasn't true. I said that in a desperate moment. It's not something I believe." She sat down, and I sat down with her. I was thinking that I should have just puked up some pasta for her instead of getting pissed off. "What do you believe, then?" I asked. "As long as either of us is alive, I will be your mother," she said. "Even if you die, When?" I said. She nodded. "Even when you die, I will still be your mom, Hazel. I won't stop being your mom. Have you stopped loving Gus?" I shook my head. "Well, then how could I stop loving you?" "Okay," I said. My dad was crying now. "I want you guys to have a life," I said. "I worry that you won't have a life, that you'll sit around here all day with no me to look after and stare at the walls and want to off yourselves." After a minute, Mom said, "I'm taking some classes. Online, through IU, to get my master's in social work. In fact, I wasn't looking at antioxidant recipes. I was writing a paper." "Seriously? I don't want you to think I'm imagining a world without you. But if I get my MSW, I can counsel families in crisis or lead groups dealing with illness in their families or—" "Wait, you're going to become a Patrick?" "Well, not exactly. There are all kinds of social work jobs." Dad said, "We've both been worried that you'll feel abandoned. It's important for you to know that we will always be here for you, Hazel. Your mom isn't going anywhere." "No, this is great. This is fantastic." I was really smiling. "Mom is going to become a Patrick. She'll be a great Patrick. She'll be so much better at it than Patrick is." "Thank you, Hazel. That means everything to me." I nodded. I was crying. I couldn't get over how happy I was, crying genuine tears of actual happiness for the first time in maybe forever, Imagining my mom as a Patrick. It made me think of Anna's mom. She would have been a good social worker too. After a while, we turned on the TV and watched ANTM. But I paused it after 5 seconds because I had all these questions for Mom. So how close are you to finishing? If I go up to Bloomington for a week this summer, I should be able to finish by December. How long have you been keeping this from me exactly? A year. Mom! I didn't want to hurt you, Hazel. Amazing. So when you're waiting for me outside of MCC or support group or whatever, you're always, yes, working or reading. This is so great. If I'm dead, I want you to know I will be sighing at you from heaven every time you ask someone to share their feelings. My dad laughed. I'll be right there with you, kiddo, he assured me. Finally, we watched ANTM. Dad tried really hard not to die of boredom, and he kept messing up which girl was which, saying, "We like her?" No, we revile Anastasia. We like Antonia, the other blonde, Mom explained. "They're all tall and horrible," Dad responded. "Forgive me for failing to tell the difference." Dad reached across me for Mom's hand. "Do you think you guys will stay together if I die?" I asked. "Hazel, what?" "Sweetie." She fumbled for the remote control and paused the TV again. "What's wrong?" "Just, do you think you would?" "Yes, of course, Dad said. "Your mom and I love each other, and if we lose you, we'll go through it together." "Swear to God," I said. "I swear to God," he said. I looked back at Mom. "Swear to God," she agreed. "Why are you even worrying about this?" "I just don't want to ruin your life or anything." Mom leaned forward and pressed her face into my messy puff of hair and kissed me at the very top of my head. I said to Dad, "I don't want you to become like a miserable, unemployed alcoholic or whatever." My mom smiled. "Your father isn't Peter Van Houten, Hazel. You, of all people, know it is possible to live with pain." "Yeah, okay," I said. Mom hugged me, and I let her, even though I didn't really want to be hugged. "Okay, you can unpause it," I said. Anastasia got kicked off. She threw a fit. It was awesome. I ate a few bites of dinner, bow tie pasta with pesto, and managed to keep it down. Chapter 25. I woke up the next morning panicked because I'd dreamed of being alone and boatless in a huge lake. I bolted up, straining against the BiPAP, and felt Mom's arm on me. "Hi, you okay?" My heart raced, but I nodded. Mom said, "Caitlin's on the phone for you." I pointed at my BiPAP. She helped me get it off and hooked me up to Philip, and then finally I took my cell from Mom and said, "Hey, Caitlin." "Just calling to check in," she said. "See how you're doing." "Yeah, thanks," I said. "I'm doing okay." "You've just had the worst luck, darling. It's unconscionable." "I guess," I said. I didn't think much about my luck anymore, one way or the other. Honestly, I didn't really want to talk with Caitlin about anything, but she kept dragging the conversation along. "So, what was it like?" she asked. "Having your boyfriend die? It sucks." "No," she said. "Being in love." "Oh," I said. "Oh, it was nice to spend time with someone so interesting. We were very different, and we disagreed about a lot of things, but he was always so interesting, you know." "Alas, I do not. The boys I'm acquainted with are vastly uninteresting." "He wasn't perfect or anything. He wasn't your fairy tale Prince Charming or whatever. He tried to be like that sometimes, but I liked him best when that stuff fell away." "Do you have like a scrapbook of pictures and letters he wrote?" "I have some pictures, but he never really wrote me letters. Except, well, there are some missing pages from his notebook that might have been something for me, but I guess he threw them away or they got lost or something." "Maybe he mailed them to you," she said. "Nah, they'd have gotten here." "Then maybe they weren't written for you," she said. Maybe, not to depress you or anything, but maybe he wrote them for someone else and mailed them. Van Houten! I shouted. Are you okay? Was that a cough? Caitlin, I love you. You are a genius. I have to go. I hung up, rolled over, reached for my laptop, turned it on, and emailed Liedewij.Vliegendhart. Liedewij. I believe Augustus Waters sent a few pages from a notebook to Peter Van Houten shortly before he, Augustus, died. It is very important to me that someone reads these pages. I want to read them, of course, but maybe they weren't written for me. Regardless, they must be read. They must be. Can you help? Your friend, Hazel Grace Lancaster. She responded late that afternoon. Dear Hazel, I did not know that Augustus had died. I am very sad to hear this news. He was such a very charismatic young man. I am so sorry and so sad. I have not spoken to Peter since I resigned that day we met. It is very late at night here, but I am going over to his house first thing in the morning to find this letter and force him to read it. Mornings were his best time, usually. Your friend, Liedewij Vliegendhart. P.S. I am bringing my boyfriend in case we have to physically restrain Peter. I wondered why he'd written Van Houten in those last days instead of me, telling Van Houten that he'd be redeemed if only he gave me my sequel. Maybe the notebook pages had just repeated his request to Van Houten. It made sense, Gus leveraging his terminality to make my dream come true. The sequel was a tiny thing to die for, but it was the biggest thing left at his disposal. I refreshed my email continually that night, slept for a few hours, and then commenced to refreshing around 5 in the morning. But nothing arrived. I tried to watch TV to distract myself, but my thoughts kept drifting back to Amsterdam, imagining Liedewij Vliegendhart and her boyfriend bicycling around town on this crazy mission to find a dead kid's last correspondence. How fun it would be to bounce on the back of Liedewij Vliegendhart's bike down the brick streets, her curly red hair blowing into my face, the smell of the canals and cigarette smoke. All the people sitting outside the cafes drinking beer, saying their R's and G's in a way I'd never learn. I missed the future. Obviously, I knew even before his recurrence that I'd never grow old with Augustus Waters. But thinking about Liedewij and her boyfriend, I felt robbed. I would probably never again see the ocean from 30,000 feet above, so far up that you can't make out the waves or any boats, so that the ocean is a great and endless monolith. I could imagine it. I could remember it. But I couldn't see it again. And it occurred to me that the voracious ambition of humans is never sated by dreams coming true, because there is always the thought that everything might be done better and again. That is probably true even if you live to be 90, although I'm jealous of the people who get to find out for sure. Then again, I'd already lived twice as long as Van Houten's daughter, what he wouldn't have given to have a kid die at 16. Suddenly Mom was standing between the TV and me, her hands folded behind her back. Hazel, she said. Her voice was so serious I thought something might be wrong. Yes? Do you know what today is? It's not my birthday, is it? She laughed. Not just yet. It's July 14th, Hazel. Is it your birthday? No. Is it Harry Houdini's birthday? No. I am really tired of guessing. It is Bastille Day! She pulled her arms from behind her back, producing 2 small plastic French flags and waving them enthusiastically. That sounds like a fake thing, like Cholera Awareness Day. I assure you, Hazel, that there is nothing fake about Bastille Day. Did you know that 223 years ago today, the people of France stormed the Bastille prison to arm themselves to fight for their freedom? Wow, I said. We should celebrate this momentous anniversary. It so happens that I have just now scheduled a picnic with your father in Holiday Park. She never stopped trying, my mom. I pushed against the couch and stood up. Together, we cobbled together some sandwich makings and found a dusty picnic basket in the hallway utility closet. It was kind of a beautiful day. Finally, real summer in Indianapolis, warm and humid. The kind of weather that reminds you after a long winter that while the world wasn't built for humans, we were built for the world. Dad was waiting for us, wearing a tan suit, standing in a handicapped parking spot typing away on his handheld. He waved as we parked and then hugged me. "What a day," he said. "If we lived in California, they'd all be like this." "Yeah, but then you wouldn't enjoy them," my mom said. She was wrong, but I didn't correct her. We ended up putting our blanket down by the ruins, this weird rectangle of Roman ruins plopped down in the middle of a field in Indianapolis. But they aren't real ruins. They're like a sculptural recreation of ruins built 80 years ago. But the fake ruins have been neglected pretty badly, so they have kind of become actual ruins by accident. Van Houten would like the ruins. Gus, too. So we sat in the shadow of the ruins and ate a little lunch. "Do you need sunscreen?" Mom asked. "I'm okay," I said. You could hear the wind in the leaves, and on that wind traveled the screams of the kids on the playground in the distance. The little kids figuring out how to be alive, how to navigate a world that was not built for them by navigating a playground that was. Dad saw me watching the kids and said, "You miss running around like that?" "Sometimes, I guess." But that wasn't what I was thinking. I was just trying to notice everything. The light on the ruined ruins. This little kid who could barely walk, discovering a stick at the corner of the playground. My indefatigable mother zigzagging mustard across her turkey sandwich. My dad patting his handheld in his pocket and resisting the urge to check it. A guy throwing a frisbee that his dog kept running under and catching and returning to him. Who am I to say that these things might not be forever? Who is Peter Van Houten to assert as fact the conjecture that our labor is temporary? All I know of heaven and all I know of death is in this park. An elegant universe in ceaseless motion, teeming with ruined ruins and screaming children. My dad was waving his hand in front of my face. "Tune in, Hazel. Are you there?" "Sorry, yeah, what?" "Mom suggested we go see Gus." "Oh. Yeah," I said. So after lunch, we drove down to Crown Hill Cemetery, the last and final resting place of 3 vice presidents, 1 president, and Augustus Waters. We drove up the hill and parked. Cars roared by behind us on 38th Street. It was easy to find his grave. It was the newest. The earth was still mounded above his coffin. No headstone yet. I didn't feel like he was there or anything, but I still took one of Mom's dumb little French flags and stuck it in the ground at the foot of his grave. Maybe passers-by would think he was a member of the French Foreign Legion or some heroic mercenary. Levi finally wrote back just after 6 p.m. while I was on the couch watching both TV and videos on my laptop. I saw immediately there were 4 attachments to the email, and I wanted to open them first, but I resisted temptation and read the email. Dear Hazel, Peter was very intoxicated when we arrived at his house this morning, but this made our job somewhat easier. Boss, my boyfriend, distracted him while I searched through the garbage bag Peter keeps with the fan mail in it, but then I realized that Augustus knew Peter's address. There was a large pile of mail on his dining room table where I found the letter very quickly. I opened it and saw that it was addressed to Peter, so I asked him to read it. He refused. At this point, I became very angry, Hazel, but I did not yell at him. Instead, I told him that he owed it to his dead daughter to read this letter from a dead boy. And I gave him the letter, and he read the entire thing and said, I quote him directly, "Send it to the girl and tell her I have nothing to add." I have not read the letter, although my eyes did fall on some phrases while scanning the pages. I have attached them here and then will mail them to you at your home. Your address is the same? May God bless and keep you, Hazel. Your friend, Levi Fliegentard. I clicked open the 4 attachments. His handwriting was messy, slanting across the page, the size of the letters varying, the color of the pen changing. He'd written it over many days in varying degrees of consciousness. Van Houten. I'm a good person, but a shitty writer. You're a shitty person, but a good writer. We'd make a good team. I don't want to ask you any favors, but if you have time, and from what I saw, you have plenty, I was wondering if you could write a eulogy for Hazel. I've got notes and everything, but if you could just make it into a coherent whole or whatever, or even just tell me what I should say differently. Here's the thing about Hazel. Almost everyone is obsessed with leaving a mark upon the world, bequeathing a legacy, outlasting death. We all want to be remembered. I do too. That's what bothers me most, is being another unremembered casualty in the ancient and inglorious war against disease. I want to leave a mark. But Van Houten, the marks humans leave are too often scars. You build a hideous mini-mall or start a coup or try to become a rock star and you think, they'll remember me now, but A, they don't remember you, and B, all you leave behind are more scars. Your coup becomes a dictatorship. Your mini-mall becomes a lesion. Okay, maybe I'm not such a shitty writer, but I can't pull my ideas together, Van Houten. My thoughts are stars I can't fathom into constellations. We are like a bunch of dogs squirting on fire hydrants. We poison the groundwater with our toxic piss, marking everything mine in a ridiculous attempt to survive our deaths. I can't stop pissing on fire hydrants. I know it's silly and useless, epically useless in my current state, but I am an animal like any other. Hazel is different. She walks lightly, old man. She walks lightly upon the earth. Hazel knows the truth. We're as likely to hurt the universe as we are to help it, and we're not likely to do either. People will say it's sad that she leaves a lesser scar, that fewer remember her, that she was loved deeply but not widely. But it's not sad, Van Houten. It's triumphant. It's heroic. Isn't that the real heroism? Like the doctors say, first do no harm. The real heroes, anyway, aren't the people doing things. The real heroes are the people noticing things, paying attention. The guy who invented the smallpox vaccine didn't actually invent anything. He just noticed that people with cowpox didn't get smallpox. After my PET scan lit up, I snuck into the ICU and saw her while she was unconscious. I just walked in behind a nurse with a badge, and I got to sit next to her for like 10 minutes before I got caught. I really thought she was going to die before I could tell her that I was going to die too. It was brutal. The incessant, mechanized haranguing of intensive care. She had this dark cancer water dripping out of her chest, eyes closed, intubated. But her hand was still her hand, still warm, and the nails painted this almost black, dark blue, and I just held her hand and tried to imagine the world without us, and for about 1 second I was a good enough person to hope she died, so she would never know that I was going too. But then I wanted more time so we could fall in love. I got my wish, I suppose. I left my scar. A nurse guy came in and told me I had to leave, that visitors weren't allowed, and I asked if she was doing okay, and the guy said she's still taking on water. A desert blessing, an ocean curse. What else? She is so beautiful. You don't get tired of looking at her. You never worry if she is smarter than you. You know she is. She is funny without ever being mean. I love her. I am so lucky to love her, Van Houten. You don't get to choose if you get hurt in this world, old man, but you do have some say in who hurts you. I like my choices. I hope she likes hers. I do, Augustus. I do.
Acknowledgements. The author would like to acknowledge that disease and its treatment are treated fictitiously in this novel. For example, there is no such thing as phalanxophore. I made it up, because I would like for it to exist. Anyone seeking an actual history of cancer ought to read The Emperor of All Maladies by Siddhartha Mukherjee. I am also indebted to The Biology of Cancer by Robert A. Weinberg, and to Josh Sundquist, Marshall Urist, and Jannica Hollanders, who shared their time and expertise with me on medical matters, which I cheerfully ignored when it suited my whims. Esther Earle, whose life was a gift to me and to many. I am also grateful to the Earle family, Lori, Wayne, Abby, Angie, Grant, and Abe, for their generosity and friendship. Inspired by Esther, the Earls have founded a non-profit, This Star Won't Go Out, in her memory. You can learn more at www.tswgo.org. The Dutch Literature Foundation, for giving me 2 months in Amsterdam to write. I'm particularly grateful to Floor van Kappen, Jean-Christophe Bull van Hansbroek,